Ladies, let's talk about a little secret no one wants to admit. Men fall hardest, not when they're constantly praised or pursued, but when they're challenged. And no, I don't mean picking fights or playing cruel games. I mean when you show a man that your world doesn't orbit around him, that your standards are high and your energy is too valuable to be wasted. That's when everything shifts. That's when the chase begins. Challenge his ego, and you'll see a different kind of man emerge. The one who's not used to being called out, questioned, or made to work harder for attention. Most people stroke his ego to keep him close, but when you stand rooted in your own confidence, without needing his approval, everything changes. When you walk into a room owning your energy, not trying to impress, he feels that difference. You're not competing for his time. You're commanding space just by being unapologetically you. That's when he starts leaning in, intrigued, and a little off balance, wondering how to earn your interest. You don't need to play games to challenge him. You simply need to raise the bar. Stop rewarding mediocre effort. If he gives you a lazy message, don't respond with excitement like he's doing you a favor. Your time and energy are precious, and when you protect them, he has no choice but to rise to the standard or get left behind. Men, don't fall for the woman who's always available and agreeable. They fall for the woman who can hold a boundary without flinching, who isn't afraid to say, "This doesn't work for me," and actually mean it. Challenging his ego also means not feeding it with shallow flattery. Anyone can compliment a man's looks, but the moment you admire something deeper, his resilience, his integrity, the way he handles pressure, you trigger something powerful. He starts seeing you as someone who sees beyond the surface, someone whose opinion genuinely matters. And when you question him, not to provoke, but to understand, you invite authenticity, and he begins to feel safe being real. That's when the mask drops and the connection deepens. But above all, don't ever fear walking away. The woman who doesn't chase, who continues building her own life and only makes space for those who truly deserve it, that's the woman who lingers in his mind long after the conversation ends. You don't need to manipulate or beg for attention. The greatest power you hold is the ability to choose him from a place of wholeness, not need. And when a man senses that you're complete with or without him, that's when his ego is challenged in the best way possible, and he falls harder than he ever expected. When you constantly reward a man for minimal effort, you unintentionally teach him that he doesn't have to do much to keep your attention. If he sends you a lazy text late at night like, "What's up?" and you respond immediately with enthusiasm, you're signaling that your time is easily accessible and that he doesn't need to put in any real energy to connect with you. This sets the tone for the dynamic, where he leads with the bare minimum and still gets your full attention. The problem isn't the message itself. It's what your response says about how you value yourself. Responding eagerly to crumbs tells him that he doesn't need to step up, plan ahead, or be intentional. It reinforces the idea that you're available on his terms and that your time is not something he has to earn. Men, whether they realize it or not, instinctively respect what they have to work for. When you make it too easy, They may enjoy the convenience in the short term, but they won't feel inspired to commit or invest deeply. That lack of effort from his side quickly becomes a pattern that's hard to break. Instead, challenge him by showing that your attention is a privilege, not a given. If he texts you last minute or puts in minimal effort, you don't have to react with coldness, but you also don't need to jump at every opportunity to connect. Take your time. Don't be afraid to skip the reply altogether if it doesn't align with your standards. This isn't about playing games. It's about demonstrating self-respect. When he realizes he can't just drop breadcrumbs and expect a feast in return, he'll either rise to meet your energy or fall away. Either way, you win. This shift in response will either frustrate him or wake him up. And if he values you, it'll be the wake-up call he didn't know he needed. He'll start thinking more intentionally about how he shows up, what he says, and how he can earn your time. That's when you stop being just another option and become the standard. Your silence will speak louder than any message. Your boundaries will do the talking. And without saying much at all, you'll challenge his ego in a way that makes him fall not just harder, but with purpose. Asking a man questions that make him uncomfortable isn't about confrontation. It's about clarity. When you look past charm and surface talk and ask something real like, what do you actually want in a relationship? You're not just making conversation. You're calling on him to stop hiding behind vague intentions and get honest. Most people don't challenge him this way because they're afraid of pushing him away. But the truth is, if a question like that scares him off, he was never ready to begin with. These kinds of questions cut through ego and test his emotional depth. When a man is used to impressing others with status, humor, or smooth words, he's rarely put in a position where he has to reflect and articulate his intentions. But when you sit across from him, calm and composed, and ask something thoughtful, you shift the dynamic. You're no longer just someone to impress. You become someone who sees through him. And that can shake him, especially if he's not used to being seen for who he truly is. The moment he fumbles or avoids the question, it's not your cue to fix it or soften your stance. It's your insight. His reaction tells you everything about his emotional maturity. Is he serious about connection, or is he floating in ambiguity? When you ask something deep and he gets defensive, dismissive, or changes the subject, that's not your signal to lower your expectations. It's a red flag waving just for you. Pay attention not just to the answer, but to his comfort level with emotional honesty. Men who are ready won't be thrown by these kinds of questions. They'll be grateful for them. They'll lean in, even if they don't have all the answers yet, because they recognize a woman who values depth over games. When you challenge a man's ego with direct, meaningful conversation, you aren't being difficult. You're being discerning. And in doing so, you filter out the ones who aren't ready and draw in the ones who are. That's how you stop wasting time and start creating real connection. Setting boundaries is not about being cold or controlling. It's about showing self-respect. When you clearly express what you will and will not accept, you send a strong message about how you expect to be treated. Most people are afraid to set boundaries because they fear losing someone. But the truth is, when you let your standards slide, you end up losing yourself. A man might enjoy the freedom of getting his way at first, but deep down, he won't admire or value someone who allows her limits to be crossed without consequence. Men are drawn to women who are kind but firm, who can love deeply yet still say no when something feels wrong. When you say yes to everything, you send the message that your needs are secondary. But when you say no, calmly, without drama, you take back your power. You teach him that access to you requires respect, effort, and consistency. That's not being difficult, that's being clear. And clarity is attractive because it shows confidence, something every healthy relationship needs to thrive. A man's ego will often test your boundaries. He may try to see how flexible they are, how much he can get away with, or whether you'll compromise your values just to keep him close. This is where most people give in, afraid that holding firm will scare him away. But the truth is, when you stand your ground, you create one of two outcomes. Either he respects you more and steps up, or he walks away, saving you time and pain. Either result is a win because you've protected your emotional space and your self-worth. Boundaries don't push the right man away. They attract him. The man who's ready for something real will admire the woman who isn't afraid to protect her peace. He'll feel safe around someone who knows who she is and what she deserves. And the man who isn't ready, he'll find the exit when he realizes he can't bend you to fit his comfort zone. That's okay. Let him go. Because when you set your standards and refuse to settle, you become unforgettable. Not because you played games, but because you knew your worth and refused to compromise it. There is a quiet power in walking away and letting your absence do the talking. When you stop showing up every time he reaches out, when you no longer rush to reply to every message, something shifts. He begins to notice the space you once filled, and suddenly, the silence feels louder than any words you could have said. It's not about ignoring him to play games. It's about honoring yourself enough to stop chasing someone who isn't showing up for you with the same energy. When you choose to focus on your life instead of constantly checking your phone for his attention, it sends a message that speaks directly to his ego. Men are used to being pursued, especially when they know they hold a woman's interest. But when that interest is no longer so obvious, when your attention is no longer guaranteed, it creates a sense of uncertainty. And that uncertainty challenges his pride. He starts wondering where your focus went, what you're doing, and most importantly, why you're not running after him. That space you create becomes a mirror for him. It forces him to think, to question, and to feel the loss of your energy. He may not have realized how much he enjoyed your presence until it's no longer there. That's the irony of distance. It reveals value. When you step back, it's not a punishment. It's clarity. You're no longer participating in a one-sided connection, and in doing so, you reclaim your time, your peace, and your emotional balance. That choice leaves a lasting impression. Men fall hardest not when they're constantly reassured, but when they're given space to realize what they stand to lose. Your absence becomes a trigger for reflection, and that reflection often leads to action. Suddenly, He's the one thinking of ways to earn you back, to feel close to you again. But this time, it's not because you begged or proved your worth. It's because you walked away when he stopped appreciating it. And that kind of silence, it echoes in ways that no words ever could. Complimenting a man's appearance is easy and expected. It's the kind of validation he likely receives from many people. And while it feels good in the moment, it doesn't truly stand out. But when you choose to compliment something deeper, his character, his strength, his emotional intelligence, it stops him in his tracks. It tells him that you see beyond the surface and are paying attention to who he really is, not just what he looks like. That kind of recognition hits differently. And it makes him want to show you more of his substance. When you say something like, "I admired how calmly you handled that situation," or "It's attractive how you think things through instead of reacting," you're touching on qualities that he doesn't always hear about. Most men aren't used to being acknowledged for their growth, their thoughtfulness, or their patience. By highlighting those qualities, you're challenging his ego in the best way. You're not feeding it with surface praise. You're elevating the conversation, inviting him to show up as a better version of himself. This kind of compliment shifts his focus. Instead of trying to impress you with flashy behavior or empty charm, he starts wanting to show more of his real self, the one that thinks, feels, and leads with intention. He becomes more self-aware, not just to keep your attention, but because you've reflected back to him something meaningful about who he is. That reflection is powerful. It leaves a lasting impression, and it separates you from anyone else who's ever made him feel temporarily admired. The beauty of complimenting his depth is that it doesn't just make him feel seen. It inspires him to keep growing. When a man knows that what truly attracts you is his inner world, not just his outer appearance, he starts showing up differently. He begins to value your perspective more because he knows it's rooted in truth, not flattery. And once he realizes that you're the woman who sees what others overlook, that's when he falls. Not because you boosted his ego, but because you spoke to something real inside him. Disagreeing with a man respectfully is one of the most underrated yet powerful ways to challenge his ego. When you voice a different opinion calmly and confidently, it shows that you're not afraid to think for yourself. It proves that you're not trying to impress or be agreeable for the sake of keeping peace. That kind of authenticity stands out, has been, especially in a world where so many people stay quiet just to be liked, has been. Your ability to speak your truth, even if it doesn't align with his, immediately sets you apart. A man may not always like being disagreed with, especially if he's used to people going along with whatever he says. But deep down, he respects someone who challenges him to think differently. It doesn't mean you have to argue or create conflict. It simply means you hold your own in a conversation, that you bring perspective, insight, and individuality. When you express your thoughts without fear of judgment, you give him permission to drop the act and have a real exchange. What makes this dynamic so attractive is that it requires emotional maturity. You're not disagreeing to be difficult, you're being honest and clear about your views. And if he can handle that without getting defensive, it opens the door to mutual respect. A man who is truly confident won't be threatened by your opinion. He'll be intrigued by it. He'll start seeing you not just as someone he's dating or talking to, but as an equal, someone whose mind he genuinely wants to understand, has been. This kind of connection doesn't just challenge his ego. It invites him to grow. Being around a woman who isn't afraid to speak her mind encourages him to be more reflective, more open, and more real. He may not say it outright, but that challenge will stay with him. He'll replay the conversation in his head, wondering why it felt so different, so meaningful. And the more you hold your ground with grace and intelligence, the more he'll realize you're not like the rest. And that's exactly why he won't be able to forget you. Leaving a sense of mystery in the early stages of a connection is one of the most powerful ways to keep a man genuinely intrigued. When you reveal everything about yourself too quickly, it gives him no space to be curious, no room to wonder what lies beneath the surface. While it might feel like being open builds trust fast, it can actually rob the experience of depth and anticipation. There's something captivating about getting to know someone slowly, piece by piece, where each new layer feels earned and meaningful. A man who is truly interested will want to discover who you are gradually. He'll be drawn to the energy you give off when you hold your stories and experiences with care, not because you're hiding anything, but because you respect yourself enough not to offer everything at once. That creates a natural pace, and it gives him the opportunity to show consistency. The more he shows up with effort and presence, the more of yourself you can choose to share. And that unfolding builds not just interest, but emotional investment. Oversharing too early often stems from a desire to be accepted or understood quickly, but it can overwhelm the dynamic. It leaves little to the imagination and makes the connection feel rushed. By contrast, when you let conversations breathe, allow pauses, and don't feel pressured to fill every silence, you create an atmosphere of ease and emotional maturity. He begins to realize that he's going to have to slow down and genuinely pay attention if he wants to know you on a deeper level. Mystery doesn't mean playing games or being secretive. It simply means being selective. Your thoughts, your past, your dreams, and your heart are valuable. Share them with someone who proves he's willing to listen, stay, and keep showing up. When you create that sense of emotional intrigue, he won't just feel attracted. He'll feel challenged in the best way, has been. And in trying to figure you out, he'll keep coming back, not out of habit, the apology has been, but because he knows there's so much more to you than what meets the eye. The fear of losing someone can be so powerful that it causes you to bend, shrink, and mold yourself into someone you're not, just to keep them around. You start agreeing to things that don't sit right with you, overlooking red flags, apology has been, and silencing your needs in the name of love or connection. But in doing so, apology has been, you're not preserving the relationship. You're slowly erasing yourself. When you make someone else's presence more important than your own peace, you lose more than just power. You lose your identity. Letting go of that fear doesn't mean you don't care. It means you understand that your self-worth isn't tied to whether or not someone chooses to stay. When you stand tall in your truth, even at the risk of them walking away. You show unshakable strength. And that strength is rare. Most people are so used to being tolerated rather than challenged that they don't know how to handle someone who would rather walk alone than settle for less. That quiet confidence isn't just attractive. It's unforgettable. A man can sense when you're afraid to lose him. It shows in the way you hesitate to speak up, the way you over-explain, the way you constantly try to prove your value. But when he feels that shift, when he realizes you are no longer operating from fear, but from self-assurance, everything changes. Suddenly, the balance of power is no longer in his hands. He's not the one deciding whether you're worth it. You are. And now, he's the one who starts wondering if he measures up. When you detach from the fear of losing him, you become the one who holds the standard. You no longer tolerate breadcrumbs or half effort. You no longer invest in potential. You respond to actions. And that shift in energy, it doesn't push the right man away, it draws him closer. Because men fall hardest for the woman who chases. They fall for the one who knows she doesn't have to. And in realizing he could lose you, he starts doing everything he can to make sure he never does. There is something deeply powerful about being the woman who doesn't need a man to feel whole, but who chooses to be with one from a place of strength. When your happiness, peace, and self-worth come from within, you stop placing unrealistic expectations on someone else to complete you. That independence is magnetic, the apology has been. It challenges the traditional dynamic where one person holds all the power, and instead, it creates a relationship built on mutual respect and choice, not dependency or fear of being alone. When a man realizes that you are emotionally self-sufficient, it forces him to evaluate his own role in your life. He can't rely on charm or convenience to keep your attention. He has to show up with something more. Consistency, effort, emotional presence. He's no longer just filling a space. He's trying to earn one. This shift takes the focus off chasing or convincing and places it on compatibility and shared values. And for a man who's truly ready, that's not intimidating. It's inspiring. Choosing someone when you don't need them is one of the most genuine forms of love. It means you're with him not out of fear, pressure, or loneliness, but because he genuinely adds value to your life. That realization challenges his ego in the best way. He knows he isn't your only option. He knows you'd be fine on your own. And yet you're still there, choosing him. That kind of love feels different. It's not based on obligation or need. It's based on admiration, respect, and emotional depth. This is what makes him fall hard. He doesn't feel trapped in a dynamic where he holds all the power. Instead, he's motivated to rise, to match your energy, and to earn his place beside you. He sees that your love is a privilege, not a right. And the moment he realizes you're not there because you have to be, but because you genuinely want to be, it shifts everything. Apology has been. That's when you stop being someone he likes and become someone he can't stop thinking about. Because choosing someone from fullness is the greatest challenge to ego and the most irresistible invitation to love.